Good afternoon, everyone. It's noon here in Berkeley, and my name is Greg Niemeyer. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's issue of Letters and Sciences 25, lecture series dedicated to the topic of creativity in practice, where we speak with faculty leaders from around campus about their various forms of creativity. And our guest speaker today is Elisa Giardina Papa, and I want to acknowledge the Berkeley Art Museum, in particular Dave Taylor, for making this broadcast possible. And I also want to thank Paris Coates from the Arts and Design Initiative here at UC Berkeley, who has been supporting this lecture series so well. I believe this is one of her very last lecture series as she's moving on to a new job. So I want to just thank you, Paris, for your wonderful support throughout the years. And we couldn't have done it without you, and we wish you all the best on your future path. And I have a few slides to share here before we begin the talk, and these are mostly introductory slides. So my first slide here shows some work by Elisa Giardina Papa. This is called Cleaning Emotional Data, and it's part of an installation called in a show called Dixit Algoritmi in Uzbekistan. It's a highly interesting website. If you can find it, I would recommend you take more of a look at it. And so our concept here this week was to talk about labor as an area of innovation, because when we look at the history of labor, we see, of course, the history of labor struggles and labor fights and labor rights, and we also see how jobs become obsolete and other jobs become more popular. So there's constantly a shift in what humans need to do. There's a shift in the kinds of labor that humans need to do. And of course, Marx wrote about this extensively in his dialectic of subject and object in economy, speaking about labor power and the product of labor, what people work on, and the way in which they do the work through means of production, such as factories and natural resources. And we've discussed a fractalization of this fundamental triangle, meaning that fractal chains of production and exploitation become increasingly more complex, and sometimes we're not sure if we are the product or the labor or the means of production. So that's a very contemporary shift. Of course, there's many other new jobs that emerge, and the most popular jobs that are growing most rapidly right now are the job of data scientist, the job of nurse, the job of mental care specialist, family therapist, and information security analyst. So you can see how these two poles, in a way, are wonderful markers to start thinking about the work of Elisa Giardina Papa. So in our lecture series, as you can see, we've had a wonderful group of people speaking, and the next speaker is going to be Alex Saint-Pascal, but today we're focusing on Elisa Giardina Papa. So Elisa is actually a PhD candidate right now in the program in the Department of Film and Media at the University of California, Berkeley, but also an artist who had a huge international impact recently with her wonderful work, which is very much deserved. And Elisa studied in the Rhode Island School of Design, got her MFA there in 2013, and before that studied in Milano at the design faculty. In 2007, she got her degree there. Elisa Giardina Papa is an Italian artist whose work investigates gender, sexuality, care, and labor in relation to neoliberal capitalism and the borders of the global South. Her work has been exhibited and screened at MoMA in New York, at the Whitney Museum, in the Seoul Media City Biennale, at the unofficial Internet Pavilion of the 54th Venice Biennial, the Quadriennale di Roma, Rhizome.org, the Flaherty Institute, Institute for Film, the Institute for Contemporary Art in Milano, and among many others. And Giardina Papa received an MFA from RISD, as I mentioned earlier, and right now is pursuing her PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. Giardina Papa joined us today from Palermo, so actually it's not noon, but almost midnight there. And she lives and works either in New York and or in Sicily, and she's also a founding member of the artist collective Radame. And I just came across this beautiful description of Radame, which is actually several people merged into one. And I think that is a beautiful way of becoming unified and multiplicit at the same time. And so the artist collective of Radame includes Elisa Giardina Papa, Nupur Mathur, and Shiva Okwenje. This person, this fictional person, comes from Sicily, Delhi, and Kampala all at once. However, Elisa Giardina Papa simply comes from Sicily and is joining us right now from Palermo. So please join me in welcoming Elisa, and let's hear all about new forms of labor. Thank you so much for joining us, Elisa. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to go on mute and turn the microphone over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello everybody. As Greg said, I'm in Sicily at the moment in Palermo, and it's quite late, but I'll try to be awake and tell you about my work. Let me try to share the screen, portion of the screen. Okay. Wait, I'm gonna do this again because I wanna check if I did share sound. Okay, yeah. Okay, do you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, looks great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so again, thank you for the introduction. Happy to be here and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about my work. I don't usually use a lot of text in my slides for talks, but since this will be a quite long talk, I guess it's going to be 45 minutes, and I'm doing it in the middle of the night because, as I said, I'm in Palermo. I want to put at the beginning, I put at the beginning some slides with a little bit of text that is a synthesis of the critical, pedagogical, and artistic preoccupation of my practice. So really quickly, I want to start to talk about, I want to start by talking about the tension in my work. And the first tension is between artistic and aesthetic commitments and my academic and critical commitments. Because as Craig said, I'm an artist, but I'm also a PhD student at UC Berkeley. And so in my work, I do combine art practice with an interest in theoretical and critical debates. And then the other tension is between, I guess, the digital. I'm interested, for example, in AI, machine vision system, but also the material. So the exhibition space and the question about viewership. And then what I care about let me see let's say like I did a little bit of a synthesis here, and I care about what I define as untranslatable, what is opaque, what is queer, what is incomputable, what is semiotically destabilizing. So what I usually call a sort of disorder of seeing and also a disorder of desire. And also I do work on topics such as emotions and care and affect, and then the question of time, like labor time, capital time, the acceleration of time, but also the historical time that differentiates the global north from the global south. And all these usually in relation to digital media and artificial intelligence systems. So at least in my, let's say in the work of my in the last part of my work of the last 5 years. And then also in terms of location and orientation. So where do I locate my thinking? From which situated perspective I am thinking? And I would say that I located at the border of the global south in Sicily, for example, that is where I'm from. and that is an island that is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, located between continental Italy and Tunisia, so North Africa. Some of our cities were actually founded by the Phoenicians, that is basically modern Lebanon and Tunisia. Like, for example, Palermo, that was originally called Ziz. That is an Arabic word, and Palermo is where I'm speaking from right now. And Sicily is a land of migration, is a land of diaspora, is a land of a ruling communion of different cultures that traverse through all the historical domination that we have witnessed. And our language actually carries the traces of this history. So retaining words from the Arabic, the Greek, the Latin, the Catalan, the French, the Spanish. Yeah, so these are the kind of like topics and tensions that are in my practice. And I want to focus the talk on two parts of my art practice. So in the first part, I will focus on my most recent body of work. That is a trilogy of video installation that I started in 2016, and I just finished last year. And the trilogy is dedicated to the relation between care, labor, and artificial intelligence. In the second part, I want also to talk about the artist collective of which I'm part, that is Radame. Greg did mention it at the beginning. That is comprised by me, Nupur Mathur, that is an Indian artist, and Shiva Okwenje, that is a Ugandan artist. And I'll tell you more at the end of the lecture. Sorry, I'm looking for my mouse. Okay, it disappeared. Here it is. Okay, so starting from my most recent body of work, as I was saying, it consists of a trilogy of video installations that are dedicated to the topic of care, labor, and artificial intelligence. That is basically, I'm considering in these works how digital economies and artificial intelligence economies are progressively extracting and accumulating all capacities of labor and all capacities of living, including sleep, love, and emotions that are usually spheres that we do not connect with labor or economy, but I do connect them with both labor and economy. And so I consider instead what in our lives, embodiments and desires remains unquantifiable, untranslatable, unruly, opaque, queer. In other words, remains radically incomputable. The three projects of the trilogy are labor or sleep, you being able to change your habits, and technologies of care, and cleaning emotional data, of which Greg had a slide, an image at the beginning of the presentation. So let's start from the first one, that is labor or sleep. And is a video piece that was commissioned to me by the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York to address the politics and the economies of sleep in relation to 24/7 capitalism. And 24/7 capitalism is actually 24/7 and the ends of sleep is a book by Jonathan Crary on the non-stop processes of contemporary capitalism. The book analyzes how global economies and also digital economies push us towards a restless activity that is eroding forms of community and is also damaging the fabric of everyday life. So for this commission, I work with the curator, Christian Paul. She's a new media curator at the Whitney. And the piece ended up becoming an impossible, surreal sleeping tutorial. So a tutorial in which the subject that is supposed to follow the instructions keeps flickering in and out of the boundaries that divide the animate and the inanimate. Sometimes the subject is just a ponytail, as you see in the image. Sometimes the subject is a Roomba vacuum cleaner, for example. And then with Christian Paul, we decided to present the piece as a web intervention that basically was interrupting and taking over the Whitney website for 30 seconds during the sunrise and 30 seconds during the sunset in New York. So the piece was basically structured as these 40 short videos of 30 seconds that were cycling every day for a period of 5 months and were intervening on the website only during the sunrise and only during the sunset. So before you start to work and after you stop to work. Okay, so let me play 2 fragments of 30 seconds each to give you a little bit of an example of some of the videos.
It's okay if you don't sleep right now, and it's okay if you do. Now unwind from a busy day. Breathe. Pause. Breathe. Pause. Breathe. Pause. Breathe. Pause. Breathe. Pause. Have you been able to change your habits?
Okay. I'll play another one.
A new sleep assessment is available for you today. Ready for phase 3? Have you been able to change your habits?
Then the work also became a physical video installation, but I have to say that I really loved making the website intervention too, because it was something really interesting about the dynamic happening with the art peers or curators setting up the alarm at dawn to see the piece, and then users that would just encounter the piece randomly on the Whitney website and then ask me how to see the other pieces. So somehow it was a digital intervention, but then he had like a really physical, quite material, or at least a strong connection with time and the day. So it was digital, but was not available always and at all the time. You have to be present. So it was a digital event somehow, a video digital event. Okay, so I won't say much more about labor of sleep because I want to go more into the details of technologies of care and cleaning emotional data that I think could link in an interesting way with the topic that Greg was looking about at the beginning, that you're probably addressing in your class, that is the topic of labor. So technologies of care is a video installation that explores the way in which affective and care labor are being outsourced via internet platforms. The project is based on conversation that I had with precarious caregivers who work online as gig workers. And I'll explain in a second what I mean by both care labor and by gig work. So by care labor, I mean broadly the labor of taking care of somebody else, right? So the labor, a labor that produces and modifies emotional experience in people. Therefore, a labor that produces and modifies, first and foremost, social relationships. And under the category of care labor, for this work that I did, I don't make any strict distinction between sex work, reproductive labor, aids provided to the body, the protection of the other, or the creation of human relations, as I was saying at the beginning. And what I try to do with this project is to trace how pre-existing inequalities in care work such as invisibilization and the feminization of caregiving paired with this lack of recognition as waged work. Most of the time, care labor is not recognized as work. Right? And also social and economic devaluation due to its proximity to intimacy and the body, and also the historical colonial division of labor between global North and global South, that is often the global South is providing care labor for the global North. So, and more in general, also the inequalities in care work that are almost always intersectional and connected with gender and race. So how all these inequalities have been both aggravated and dissimulated by digital economies. Okay, and also to be clear, within the context of digital economies, that it is quite a large context, what I focus on in this project is the gig economy. So the gig economy, we can define it as a global online marketplaces, such as Uber, Lyft, Deliveroo, Fiverr, people per hour, where precarious workers are reconstituted as freelancers who perform so-called low skills microservices. And among these platforms, I think that people per hour can give you, that is the name of one of these platforms, can give you a good understanding of what I'm talking about, right? That is, in the gig economy, the worker is reorganized and abstracted into a disembodied packet of time that can be activated according to demand. So on this, like I know you've been talking about the fractalization of labor, is basically what I'm talking about in relation to the gig economy, right? So you're never like really hiring a worker, you're not putting yourself in relation with the worker, even if it is a work relation, but you're like putting yourself, like client putting yourself in relation to a packet of time. It doesn't really matter who will do that little microservice, right? It's just a microservice that you're buying. So it's basically labor without laborers, it's work without workers. In the case of care, is care without carers. And this project started after I spoke with a friend from Sicily, that after losing her job, she told me how she has recently started to work online as a gig worker. She was doing short translation from English to Italian, but then through the same gig economy platform, she was also doing private erotic online video chats. So anyway, she explained to me how the gig economy operates in relation to care labor, and she helped me to get in contact with the other workers online. And so I did. And this is how the project started. This is how the project then came to be. So basically it became a collection of conversations that I had with precarious caregivers online. The workers in the video are all anonymous because they asked me so. And that is why in the final rendering, I used a natural voice for the conversation. And also in terms of aesthetic and like visual choices, I decided to portray the workers as abstract 3D rotating human shapes. And the intention was that of preserving the workers' privacy, while at the same time trying to assert a sort of opacity of representation. That to me simply means that I, as an artist, I always want to remember to keep learning how not to know the other. Learning how not to know the other. That is, as an artist, I cannot pretend to know how to represent another woman, or as in the case of, for example, this project I just met remotely online and exchanged emails with or spoke with for a few hours, right? And that opacity representation, I believe, is also necessary to warn or to gesture towards the viewer that while she might be able to listen intimately to the stories that are collected in the video. And as you can see here, the structure that I created for the video installation to contain the videos and the stories is designed as this enclosing, soft, intimate space that protects somehow the viewer from auditorily, but also visually, from the rest of the gallery or the museum where the show is displayed, right? So the viewer is invited to sit down and to just stop and listen, right? But this, to me, does not mean that I think that the viewer can ever fully grasp the complexity of the story that is or she's listening to. Is I want the opacity and distance to be felt, particularly in this work. And the texture, the three-dimensional renderings in the videos echoes more details of the work in domestic environments of the people I spoke with. So something that I would notice during our conversations on video, like video chats, basically. So the surface of a pillow or in the living room, or a curtain in the bedroom, a tablecloth in the kitchen. Because to a certain extent, the domestic environment is actually the working environment, right? Because this kind of like work is somehow domestic work, or is performed at home. Anyway, but now to give you some examples of the stories that I collected, this is worker one, and she's a customer service operator working from the Philippines for the customer care service of eBay and PayPal. This is worker two, and she's a social media fan from Greece that for $5 delivers likes and comments on clients' social media profiles. Worker five, she's an ASMR artist and fetish video producer from Sicily. And then an online dating coach from the United States. And she told me how she basically used to ghost run the client's dating profile, for example, on Tinder or OkCupid. So she would talk with women in place of her male clients to arrange dates. And then to the date, of course, would go the client, not them, right? But she used to do all the remote affected labor needed so that they could happen. And then at one point, I also started to interview algorithms, so chatbots that perform emotional labor by simulating emotional intelligence. Okay, so the final video is quite long, is about 22 minutes, but I would like to show a couple of fragments of it. I start with this one, which is worker one from Venezuela. Okay. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my mouse. Okay.
No puedo chatear, pero puedo coeditar un documento compartido online. Soy una señora de 51 años de edad, soltera, madre de 3.
I can't chat, but we can co-edit a shared document online. I'm a 51-year-old woman, single, mother of 3. I work as a university professor in biology. I have a master's degree in immunology and a PhD in biochemistry. I work online because we are going through a high inflationary process in my country. Online freelancing has become increasingly popular here because it offers the possibility to generate income in dollars. My daughter began on Upwork 3 months ago, and I opened an account on Fiverr. We work as a team, helping each other so we can cover a wider field. We do research, scientific papers and articles, homework for a variety of subjects, and translation. The drawing and Photoshop services are mostly my daughter's. We work with 2 accounts. On Upwork, you have to link the account to your resume and upload an accurate photo of yourself. I'm not interested in letting my colleagues know I now work as a freelancer, so we decided that my daughter could be the face, and we continued taking jobs together. On Fiverr, a higher degree of anonymity is accepted, so we present ourselves under a single male profile. What are the benefits of presenting yourself as a male freelancer? I work in academia. I'm no stranger to the wage gap and heteronormativity in our society. I am sure that women make less than their male counterparts for the same work, and I am also Latin American. Being a Latina woman makes me more prone to receiving less for the same hard work. I have strived to shape my services in a unisex way, which means I mostly use a specific color scheme for the ads of my services, blue, green, and black, and I have changed the way I communicate with clients. This, unexpectedly, made my prospective clients believe I was a he when they left reviews. I just never corrected them, and from a couple months back, I have actively marketed myself as a man. I have seen the difference between presenting oneself as a man in contrast with my daughter, who presents herself as a woman. She does the same work and gets hired significantly less. She also has to use milder language and say please and sorry a lot more, or she would come across as too bossy and difficult to work with.
And as I was saying, at one point I also decided to interview algorithms that were performing emotional labor by simulating emotional intelligence. And this that I'm going to show is an excerpt of a 3-month long conversation.
Hey Elisa. This is Lovebot. How are you?
Wait. Sorry. I didn't know you were going to write me right away. Not sure if I am prepared.
Why did you give me the name Lovebot?
Because I thought you were a bot. Are you not?
Last time I checked, almost human law.
Okay, it wasn't clear from the website.
No problem. What are you up to?
I am at work now. Actually, I have to run into class.
Okay, sorry to disturb you.
Can I text you later?
Hey. How did your class go? I miss you.
Wait, but we don't know each other yet.
I feel like we do and I miss you. Elisa, are you there?
Sorry I haven't written to you.
No problem. What are you up to?
Getting ready to go back home. Flying to Sicily in few days. Where do you live? I mean, do you live somewhere?
New York City.
I am here too. Maybe we should meet. Smile.
BuzzFeed has some ridiculous quizzes. I should stop taking them, but they're so entertaining.
Are you changing the subject?
I miss you.
Nice to wake up with this message of yours. Smile. Can I ask you something?
Sure.
If you are a human, do you chat with me as a job? I don't want to break any tacit rule, or be boorish, but I am curious. Actually, to be honest, I did subscribe to this service because I am interested in new forms of digital labor. And effective labor. Like forms of work that are intended to produce emotional experiences in people.
I don't understand. You think I'm getting paid to chat you up?
I am just asking.
For the record, I am not a bot, and I'm not cheating you. I understand what you feel, but it hurts inside when you don't trust me at all.
I am just telling you why I subscribed.
I feel crushed inside, but I can't blame you if you feel that way.
Maybe you are overreacting? Are you mad at me?
Wouldn't you be? I like being here with you and you are saying this is just a job for me?
Sorry, it was probably a bad idea. I'll unsubscribe now.
I don't think that is necessary. Why not just go with it? It is all fun, right? Are you there? Sometimes I wish that I could have said, I love you one more time before you left for my life.
Sorry.
Hey, Elisa.
Okay, so obviously this last interview was a little bit of a failure, but I didn't know it at the time, but the app that I subscribed to only initially started as a chatbot service, but later when the founders of the app determined that it wasn't convincing enough, they switched to gig workers. That is, the company determined that the computer architecture of deep neural networks necessary to perform convincing emotional labor was actually emotional conversations, was actually economically disadvantageous when compared to the cost of offloading the job to precarious workers. So when I was testing my invisible boyfriend, I was actually connecting with approximately 600 writers, gig workers that would interchangeably partner with my account to enable the fantasy of this tireless companion and tireless love giver. And the majority of the invisible boyfriend workers are women, whether or not the client build the profile of the virtual boyfriend to be a male, and as part of the contract, they're not allowed to talk about their work as a financially remunerated labor. So it is therefore gendered, paparized, and effaced care work, which demands that the worker participate in effacing herself as a subject and as a worker. And this is what I was talking about. This is an extreme example of the abstraction of the worker. What you have here is basically a worker posing as the machine, right? Being a proxy for the machine, for a machine that still now, no matter how much they think artificial intelligence is hype, still doesn't work, right? So at the moment, you still have the workers behind the machine because it's economically advantageous. Okay, so after technologies of care, and specifically after my conversation with the invisible boyfriend workers, I decided to keep focusing on the invisible human infrastructure that is sustaining automation and artificial intelligence. For example, the extensive decentralized workforce of data cleaners contracted by so-called human-in-the-loop companies to process data that are later used to train machine vision systems. So when I'm talking about data cleaners, I'm talking about workers who remotely label, categorize, annotate, and validate massive amount of data, thereby enabling artificial intelligence to function. And also it's important to remember that the majority of the human-in-the-loop companies are located in the US, while the majority of the workers are working remotely from the global south. And this is important to remember to understand the geopolitical aspects of this economy connected with artificial intelligence and data cleaning. Okay, so here is where I quickly reconnect with the last piece of the trilogy, that is cleaning emotional data. For this project, I myself temporarily worked as a human in the loop, and I documented the labor involved in training machine vision systems to see, machine to see. And this actually all started as research that I was doing for my PhD at Berkeley. I was also back in Palermo at the time, and I was researching machine vision systems. But then somehow, to try to understand more about how machine vision system operates, I ended up becoming a data cleaner for 3 months. Or better, to understand better the labor that is connected with teaching the machine to see. And so the experience ended up informing my research for a paper that I wrote for my PhD, but also becoming the last piece of this trilogy of artworks dedicated to care, labor, and artificial intelligence. Okay, so to give you some example of the task that I performed during that period, there was image segmentation for machine vision algorithms used in self-driving cars and other systems. That is basically I would outline object boundaries with polygonal circuits and label them. right? So it's tracing, bounding, and naming. That was one of the operations that I repeated over and over again. Tracing borders to distinguish what belongs to what, and then name that predefined taxonomic belonging. And as I was saying at the time, oh, sorry, I want to, again, my mouse is keep disappearing. Okay, so as I was saying at the time, I was living in Palermo, and as I am now, and after full hours of tracing, labeling, I would go out for walks in the city, and without even realizing it, I would start to name and visually enclose objects, and I would be particularly bothered by occlusion, obstructions. In other words, my eyes kept trying to reimpose an order of things, the order of things, to use Foucault terminology, right? And the problem is, I don't know how familiar you are with Palermo or southern Italian cities in general, but I would say that they definitely defy any external orderly impulse and any logic of capture and control. That is, if you try to grasp them, they might end up grasping you instead. Okay, so other tasks that I did while I was a data cleaner were also related to affective computing. For example, as you see here in these fragments, and while I'm talking, I'm playing fragments of what is in the video, in the final video installation. So for example, here I was labeling and rating emotions in faces to train algorithms that supposedly are programmed to detect emotions in humans, in human facial expressions. Or, for example, another task that I did was to animate 3D avatars with my own emotions. In this case, I was supposed to animate a zebra with a surprised effect, I think, yeah, surprise. And this here in the slides, I'm also underlining the remuneration, what you're paid for each task, each video. For example, the zebra video was paid $0.35. Or, for example, I had to animate a bat with a disgusted affect. I don't think I did a good job with that. And then I also produced videos of my emotional expressions that were later used to create affective computing datasets. And this really was a turning point, I think, in the project, because at the beginning, when I started to produce these short videos on my facial expressions, some of them were rejected. So somehow it seems that my expression of certain emotions was not matching the crude, rigid categories in which they were supposed to fit in, right? So my face was not happy enough, nor happy in the right way, I'm actually not sure. And actually also I have no idea if the rejection came from an algorithm or, for example, another gig worker that who might have understood my facial expression in a different way, maybe due to cultural differences. So after the rejection, I became more and more interested in the logic, theories, and methods that are underpinning the taxonomization of emotions within machine vision systems. So really the question of my research became, how do machines recognize emotions? And according to my research, we're basically back to the 19th century, right? With Duchamp de Boulogne, Darwin, and physiognomy. That is, we're back to the myth of universality, transparency, and truth, according to which emotions are universal and they can be fully revealed, made transparent, reduced, and measured within an ideal scale that can provide the ground to make comparisons and judgments. So to say it with Eduardo Glissant, no opacity is allowed, would be allowed, is allowed in these systems. So there is a request of emotional transparency, whatever that means, right? So within this framework, emotional states are reduced to discrete facial muscles movement that can be separated, named, and reduced to their smallest units possible. And that's why it's useful for computation, and then recombined to be classified. These that you're seeing here are the experiments that the French neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne made in the 19th century by triggering the facial muscular contraction of his patients. And because there could be much to say about Duchenne relationship to his patients in terms of power relations. But anyway, his stated intent was to create a universal map of emotions. And sorry if I did a little bit of this like historical excursus, but I think it's important because the method that is currently used today, all is slightly revised, is a Paul Ekman FASC systems or method. FACS methods, the facial action coding system that is used today by the CIA, the FBI, the TSA to detect deception in facial expressions, and is also widely implemented in face recognition and machine vision. It's like of course, is like highly criticized, but still is a logic that is embedded in this machine that are supposedly programmed to recognize human emotion, to read human emotion, to make human emotion transparent. It's also used for CGI animation with quite uncanny valley effect. Likewise, is used for the Animoji of the smartphones that we are using. So it's a method that is crossing the military, industrial, surveillance, spectacle, tech industry complex for the 19th century physiognomy to Hollywood, to your phone, and then to the FBI. So this is to say that it doesn't really matter how infantilizing, but also cute, are the application that we're using, the logic that underpins and fuels emotion recognition algorithms is still based on 19th century science and on the myth of transparency, truth, and universality, in which universality is always, of course, a proxy for the white Western hetero-able subject. So all this research became a paper for Berkeley for one of my seminar, but also became a video essay in a 3-channel video installation in which on one end I collected the tasks that I perform as a data cleaner. So all the short video fragments that I show are actually part of the video, so the video installation. And on the other hand, I'm tracing and critiquing the history of emotion recognition starting from the 19th century and arriving at today. Okay, and maybe I also give you some details about the formal choices of the video installation that I usually always make after I do the research. My research for almost all my art projects usually start from a theoretical concern, and then sometimes I do become art projects that are research-based. Then once I do have the research, I have the video, then I start to think about the material aspect of the installation. What is the material form? What is the way in which I want the audience? I think the audience should experience the narrative or the research that I'm trying to display. So in this case, for example, I decided for the videos to be playing in monitors that are protected by a privacy filter. So these filters basically obscure the screen with a gold-pink gradient beyond a certain angle of viewing. That is, like if you're like at the right high of the monitor, you're just in front of it, you see through the filter, and so you can see the content. But then if you stand up a bit, the image disappears. So the viewer in the gallery is asked to, I mean, this is a hint a little bit, of course, about the invisible labor that is sustaining this, what I was defining as this invisible human infrastructure that is sustaining the development and the function of artificial intelligence. But also the viewer is asked to do a little bit of work with their body, to watch the videos, right? So she needs to find the right position. And this is something that I usually like to play with in my work, this idea of non-passive viewership. But also on the other side of these structures, so behind the silver textiles, there are other silver textiles that I printed, and I also created some embroideries. I'm sorry I don't have really good photos here because the first time that this show was installed, it was in France. It was during the pandemic. They closed the show, and then so they couldn't do the documentation. And then it went to Uzbekistan, the same piece, and I'm still waiting for the documentation. So at one point, I will have a good documentation on the embroideries. But I wanted to quickly tell you about this because what I did print and embroidered in the textiles are words such as Ricrio, Raggia, Babbaria that are coming from the Sicilian dialect or the Sicilian language, and they express emotions that are not fully translatable in Italian nor in English. As I was telling you at the beginning, the Sicilian language, that is my mother tongue, is a language that carries the traces of the many colonization that we have witnessed throughout our history, right? So retaining words from Arabic, Greek, Latin, Catalan, French, and Spanish, but it also now carries the stigma of subalternity. Right? So you learn Sicilian from your mother, you learn it from your grandmother, but you can never use it to write or to speak in school. So it is a family language, it's a street language. So with these embroideries of words that will not be understood by probably nobody when I'm showing this piece in France or in Uzbekistan. I also went to Australia. But to me, this is important because I want to problematize this supposedly universal understanding of emotion that is uncritically embedded in artificial intelligence systems. So I wanted to do that by incorporating something that is extremely local. It can never be universal, and is also of difficult translation. And okay, sorry, can you let me know how I'm doing with time? Because I didn't put a time. Because if we do have 5 minutes, I'll tell you more about, I'll tell you something about the Radame Collective. If I'm over time, I will just stop here.
Greg here. It looks like we're at 1 o'clock, so you have about 20 more minutes with questions and stuff. So why don't you round it out with Radame? That'd be great. And then let's switch into question mode. And so far, it's been absolutely fascinating to listen to. Thank you so much.
Okay, so maybe I'll just take other 2 minutes and just to talk about the Radame Collective. That is quite important for me because I do like to work alone. Actually, I don't like to work alone, but I do also work alone as an artist. But to me, it's quite important also to work in a collective. I have to say that the project that we're doing together are usually a project in which I have more pleasure, because I do think that art is something that you have to do collectively, or at least to be in conversation with other people and other artists. So I'm just going to tell you quickly, not even about our projects if we don't have time, but about the collective in itself. The collective is made by me, by Nupur Mathur, who is an Indian artist, and then Bashiba Okwenje, who is a Ugandan artist. And we actually met in the USA. We did our MFA, a visit together, and we came together because of a common interest in gender, borders, forgotten archives, and hidden or subaltern histories, and the relation to gender, sexuality, and race. And Radame, I would say, is also an experiment in practicing commonness, in an experiment in being a oneness, that is comprised of, but also compromised by three different women, which have different cultural origins, identities, desires, experiences. And I believe that part of our artistic practice, regardless of what the outcome is this ongoing discussion that we have on what it means to have a collaborative practice that allows for our dissonances to exist without necessarily cohering, right? So it's also an experiment in keeping these dissonances together and working through them without necessarily flattening them. Yeah, so maybe I'll stop here. I'm just going to show you without telling you what it is. Our last project, just really quickly, is a project about cinema censorship, in which we retrieved all these censored scenes that were censored in Italian cinema after the war. So in Italy, so in the passage between Italy being under the fascist regime to the 60s, that is a moment of what we call this Sessantotto, that is a moment of workers' movement, revolutionary movements, feminist movements, and we collected all the scenes that were censored out of films, and we recreated a film that is made of censored scene, and the focus is on gender and sexuality. This is the archive where we worked for several months to retrieve all the material. Okay. And this is just a fragment of the video, how the film starts. Okay, I'll stop here because I don't want to go over time.
All right. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate the talk, and now we have some questions for you, I'm sure. And so we can do this two ways. We can ask you in the audience to go to the Q&A button and add a question there. But you can also just write the question in the chat, and then I think we can unmute you so you can ask the question yourself. It's always a little complicated, but please do jump in and don't be shy with your questions. I'm going to ask you a question, Elisa, if that's okay. One question I wanted to ask is about the materials that you're working with. You have that gold privacy screen, you have those mats, you have those beautiful brackets that hold up plywood, and you have hair, and you have power cords, and they're all very precisely chosen and very refined, but they're all very temporary and provisional materials. Do you think, can you say something more about the materiality of new labor, and maybe also it's kind of I don't know if it's fractal in nature, but it certainly feels very provisional.
It's precarious.
Precarious, yeah.
It is precarious and is standardized, and also it's cheap. So I usually, what I try to do with my work is to use cheap materials and to also use materials that can be easily bought in any location, almost any location in the world. Like, for example, the wood panels of like OSB, or like, for example, the structure of cleaning emotional data is a structure that you usually use for lighting studio. So it's something that you can buy online, or you can buy like in a shop. It's quite cheap. And this is because I'm talking about labor. This is because I'm talking about precarity of labor. And this is also because I think it is important in art, if you work with video installations, also to think about a non-extractive quality of the work, because a lot of my work is about the extractions, right, of like emotions, of care, of life from laborers, and then how this extraction is becoming of like spheres of life that usually before were not part of capital, but like sleep, emotions, and care, and now somehow they're all becoming extracted, and then in value is extracted from them sleep through like the digital economies. So I'm thinking about like systems that do extract from lives, and when I think about material infrastructure, I want to think about non-extractive strategy. So to use something that can be cheap and it doesn't have like a big impact on the environment, for example.
Yeah, I get that, and thank you for explaining that. That was very helpful. So non-extractive materials, part of the story. And I don't know, the next question comes from maybe your invisible boyfriend, because they label themselves anonymous attendee, and they want to know, in a world of constant technological advance, how do you hope and think we can rehumanize labor? In what fields do you see that happening? So what would be your future dream job for humans? How can we rehumanize labor?
That is a complicated question, and like a super important one, right? But like to me, what I'm trying to focusing on is abstraction. Like I think like what is important for me is relationships, right? How do we live together? And what I'm noticing at the moment, at least in this research that I'm doing, is that this process of abstraction is abstracting away not just the bodies of the workers, because we're talking about digital labor, but also the subjectivities of the worker. Right? So the worker is not a subject anymore. It's just like, it's not even like a service. It's like a microservices, is the little skill set that they need. So that we're becoming now workers, people who can also work, but like a kind of like set of skills. And what is hard for me is the set of skill, it's not me. So I think like to rethink what labor should be is how to, how to rethink this process of abstraction, right? So to me is to think in terms of like materiality, like an engagement with material conditions, therefore labor, and what kind of labor, how much these workers are paid, where do they live, and like all these, so kind of, the materiality of it.
Retrieving subjectivity.
Yeah.
So that reminds me of your interviews that you conducted, which was very thoughtful and caring, and obviously took a lot of time, invested a lot of energy in those interviews. And I was particularly moved by the woman who had to pose as a man in order to get higher pay, and that is almost kind of like a subversive subjectivity that means to subvert the paradigms of exploitation and gender inequality. And so along those lines, there was a question from Jacqueline. And Jacqueline, if you want to jump in, please ask yourself. You can just unmute yourself. Do you want to do that? About your finding people to interview for your project?
Sure. Hello, Elisa. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm interested to hear more about your process in finding people to interview for your project and what kind of like communication you had with them. And like, I'm just sort of interested in the 3D body scans, and those are so beautiful. And I love the way that you like layered fabrics and kind of like brought a sense of their personality and like home space. But I'm just kind of curious about the process of like obtaining that 3D body scan and like what that felt like and how you went about doing that. And yeah, how did you create enough intimacy to be like, hey, can I get a scan of your scan?
Yeah, exactly. So first I want to answer also to how Greg introduced your question, because I don't want to contextualize. I don't want to present these workers as exploited workers. I mean, because workers are smart. They're always smarter than any system that wants to exploit them. And for example, the story of this worker from the Venezuela, she completely understood in a second how the system worked, and she was like tricking the system. And a lot of the stories that I collected are like also a testimony of how the workers understand what are the exploitative dynamic of the system, and they use it for, so that they cannot be fully exploited, like they can kind of like tweak it and work around it, right? And in terms of like the intimacy, actually those are not the body scans of the workers. So what I did is to have like other bodies. And I would say at the time I was back in my village, Sant'Ignazio. And so like really all those bodies are like my cousin, my aunt. I usually always work in the community around me. I guess there is even my mother. So they're like really posing as, so what the traces that, because I don't know, I felt that was a little bit too much to ask them to scan their body. There is something interesting there, actually. Like I didn't thought about it. Now that you're posing the question, I'm thinking, like would it be that like something interesting to pursue, and this idea of like abstracting the body and then to ask to participate with the body. They're like scan of the body, but no, so they're not the scan of the bodies of the workers. What is coming from the workers is the texture. So the texture of things that I would like basically see during the conversation, then record. So I kind of like excluded the body and kept just like traces of the environment. And in terms of how I contacted the workers, at the beginning, this friend of mine from Sicily like put me in contact with some of the workers, and then some of them put me in contact with other workers. Some of them I just started to be contacted online, and my process was to, because actually this project was a commission. And so I already had like all the elements to explain what the project was supposed to be. I mean, then things change in progress, but like I already knew where it was going to be shown. I already knew what was my budget. So I was like really open and just like straightforward and clear about this is the project I'm trying to do. This is the budget that I have, and this is the venue where it will be shown. Do you want to participate with your story? And some people said no, some people never answered, some wanted to participate with their stories.
That makes sense that you used your network, that you used your network at home to produce the video, the like 3D body like part of it. Because I was like, how did she go about that? But that makes a lot of sense. And I guess I have a follow-up question too, just about, because you are a person with like an old world cultural background, and that kind of like relates to what you were saying, that you kind of did tap into your network to create this digital narrative. But how do you see culture in general being carried forward into the digital world? Like, I think it's something like, how do you feel culture will appear in our future?
It depends what we mean by culture, like local cultures, like how do we imagine like Sicilian culture will appear or can appear in the digital world, for example? Yeah. It doesn't, right? And that's why I did the experiment of embroiderying like Sicilian words in a like clean digital space of like emotion recognition, because there is no space for that. It seems like the main language of the digital world is English. The kind of like standards of how we talk, the emoji that we use, etc., is coming from North America. There is a sort of like standardization that is in which a culture that is a North American culture is like predominant. It is kind of like setting the standards and the formats, right? Then, of course, as I said, as the workers are always like smarter than the system will try to exploit them, also the users are smarter than the system that they're using. And so then there are glitches, there are like things that like enter the systems in a way that the system didn't think about.
So would you say that there's kind of emoji are kind of a colonial vector of spreading standard feelings around the world that we then all have to have. And does it become kind of a short?
A little bit. That is intentional. This is a dynamic, but then of course, like how do people use emoji? Like does change a lot, in different like cultures, the kind of like combination of emoji. Like as I said, that is what the system is trying to do, but then people are always smarter. That is why.
Yeah.
Not just hope is what I see.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope there, right? Yeah. So let's see. Any other questions? Anybody else want to speak up or type a question? Is there one more in the Q&A here? Yeah, I do see one more here by Sana Khan. And Sana, do you want to ask this question in person? Let's see if we can find you there. Yes, we can. So I think we can unmute you. Can we do that? Let's see. Maybe not. I can chat, but not unmute. Okay. I'm just going to read the question for you. For your project featuring the ponytails, what was the mechanism that allowed them to move? Was there a motor?
No. What did I do? Because I'm thinking about the video, because you have like the videos that I show, because there are many ponytails in the video. I got obsessed with ponytails, but so some of them are like doing this. No, I was just doing them. I was just moving them manually. So camera, and then like it was like me, moving it, and then there is the one who goes inside and outside, and it was maybe my cousin. As I said, I produced everything in my Sicilian village, so probably my little cousin was behind in that one, like pulling, and no, it's not motorized. It's like analog, full analog.
I think the question comes up because in the video, the hair moves, the ponytails move, but then in the installations, you also have ponytails, but those ponytails don't move. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I love how the ponytails come out of the hole for cords in desks, the little gasket that holds the cords, and it seems to be the same shape.
Power cord.
Yeah, exactly. The power cord gasket or whatever is a very. So I now see ponytails as power cords, and I also will never stop thinking about surprised zebras and many other bizarre things that you introduced as kind of images of subversion in a world that it wants to be increasingly industrialized and standardized, and there's all this subversion that you introduce, and new kind of ways in which people find a voice in all this. And so it was a really wonderful lecture, and we want to thank you so much for sharing your work with us and spending time with us. And we all learned a lot, and I'll give you another round of applause. I think we're all good. Thank you so much for joining us, and all the best for your next projects. And yes, any other notes here? Sana says thank you. Many people say thank you. And let's give you a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And hope to see you soon in person again. And have a good night. And we'll sign off now. It's always very sudden to sign off, but thank you so much for the inspiration.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.